Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. Pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall, says Proverbs 16, verse 18. This often misquoted Bible verse seems rather apt to what we are about to witness in the book of Esther. Haman had been lifted up to the position of prime minister by King Ahasuerus. People bowed down to him almost as a mini deity. That is, except for Mordecai. And for that, Haman convinced the king to kill all the Jews at the end of the year. In the meantime, Mordecai still lived and had convinced Queen Esther to plead for the lives of the Jews before Ahasuerus. And of course, Haman was still bitter over the lack of respect showed him by Mordecai, which is why he sought to have him killed before the time to kill all the Jews had come. So, if you're Haman, although there was a Mordecai problem to deal with, things were looking pretty good for you. You had the ear of the king and could almost get him to do whatever you wanted. That was about to change here in Esther 6, and so let's find out how. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to the book of Esther, to Esther chapter 6. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 14. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Esther chapter 6, beginning at verse 1. That night the king could not sleep, so one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servants said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. In the last lesson, we discussed how Esther's delay in telling the king of her desire that he save the Jews was going to be used by God to accomplish his purpose. In the case of Haman, God didn't force Haman to do anything he didn't want to already. God didn't force Mordecai not to acknowledge Haman's presence. Mordecai was already doing that out of a respect for God and out of a righteous anger towards the edict to kill all the Jews that Haman initiated. He didn't force Haman to be saddened over that, to hate Mordecai over that, or to listen to his wife's advice to have Mordecai killed. The delay brought those things about, but God didn't force anything. With the restless state of Ahasuerus, though, we cannot be as certain that that didn't come from God, for we sometimes see that the guilty conscience of man sometimes causes us not to be able to sleep. And who gave us that conscience? God did. Haman had ordered the death of the Jews most likely a few weeks prior to this point, maybe even a few months. and yet it was this night that he couldn't sleep. Well, that could be a coincidence. I find that hard to believe. So while we cannot definitely say that God directly caused the sleepless night for the king, we can say that perhaps he did. What God didn't directly cause to happen is for the king to call for the Chronicles of the Kings to come and be read before him. We might say that the king was asking for a bedtime story, as these chronicles are the accounts of his doings. They would contain things that might soothe him to want to go to sleep. And in them are the accounts of what happened in chapter 2, with Mordecai foiling the attempted assassination plot against Ahasuerus. The king, when he heard about this, asked what was done to honor the man who uncovered this plot, to which it was told to him nothing was done. Now, of course, this would be unusual, for kings usually honor those who saved their lives, but for whatever reason, this was not done in this instance. Well, something needed to be done, thought the king. And by this time it was morning, so the king asked who was in the court to see him, as that would be customary that people who wished to see the king wait in the court to be summoned. Well, of course, we know that Haman was there, seeking to have Mordecai killed. And so when the king found that out, he summoned Haman to him. As his prime minister, Haman was in one of the best positions to answer the king's question of what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor. Haman could have said many things, but because he thought that there was nobody besides himself that the king would desire to honor, Haman presents to him the most lavish of proposals. The king should place a royal robe on this man that the king had worn, and place the man on a royal horse which the king had ridden on, with the royal crest on it. The robe and the horse would be delivered into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, who would then clothe the man in the royal attire before having him paraded through the city square, proclaiming the honor bestowed on this man by the king. That's how proud Haman was, and how sure he was that the honor was meant for him. I would have liked to see the shock on Haman's face when Ahasuerus agreed with him and told him to personally bestow this honor on Mordecai, leaving nothing undone that Haman had said. Think about that. Haman came to the king seeking to have Mordecai killed, and yet, because he let his pride get in the way, Haman was forced to honor this man by the king. How humiliating this was for Haman, but he could not refuse, for such was an order from the king. And so Haman did as he was ordered. And once it was done, Mordecai returned to the king's gate as before, while Haman returned home in mourning and with his head covered, a sign of grief. And like it was the night before, Haman told all to his wife and friends, but this night their advice was different. The night before it was kill Mordecai. However, this night it was, seeing what happened today, if Mordecai is truly Jewish, you will not prevail against him. You will fall. Why the change of attitude? Well, we're not told specifically, but there was likely some wise men or magicians among his friends who obviously saw the day's events as a sign from God of his favor towards Mordecai. This doesn't mean that these men believed that God was Jehovah, but rather just one of the gods they believed in. Regardless, though, that Mordecai should be lifted up like he was, in spite of being Jewish and under an order for extermination later that year, and in spite of his impending death request by Haman, which went unrequested, then their conclusion must be that God is at work here. And in truth, they were right, even if they weren't right about what God was going about this. God was sending Haman a subtle sign that his efforts to destroy the Jews would fail. But would Haman listen and change course? Well, we're going to find out soon enough. For remember, the day was not over. The banquet of Queen Esther was still to come, and Haman was being summoned to it. And what happened there is still remembered by the Jews unto this day. So we invite you back for the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Esther chapter 7, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.